Independence Day is just around the corner, and today we're going to have a special message called A Beautiful Heritage. And we're going to be looking at two texts principally. We're going to be looking at Job chapter 1, where we find a really interesting creed coming from Job. And then we're also going to look at Psalm 26, which I hope Psalm 26 can encourage us to have a totally different thought about judgment and how we test our faith in the world around us. So we've got a lot we're going to be talking about, and thank you for joining me. I'm Pastor J. Dylan Proctor. This is Kingdom of the Logos, and with that being said, let's jump in right to Job chapter 1. So in Job chapter 1, verse 18, he says, "Naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord giveth, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Now what Job says right there really is a massive statement about the good. And to use Pastor Amanda's language from yesterday, our podcast online, this is less of a generic statement and more of a creed. He's making a statement. He's acknowledging the very nature of creation itself. Because what you find in Job chapter 1 isn't just this run-of-the-mill, going through the motions events of life, but instead you find a massive, massive calamity. In Job chapter 1, I am going to read a bit of this. I'll try to do a little bit to unpack it so it's not just so gruesome to sit here and read all of this, because the book of Job is a very old book. But I want us to understand that what we find in Job isn't just this book about suffering, and that's typically how we take it, but it's a book about the fundamentals and foundations of heaven and earth. Because what you find in this book is the adversary, the accuser, Satan, comes and accuses Job of not really being righteous. The accuser comes before God and makes this accusatory case. He says, you know what? There really is no goodness in the world. There is nothing righteous. You just pay Job to be good, and therefore he pretends to be good. But you take away all the trappings of life. You take away his family, his prosperity. You take away all the comforts, and he will cease to be righteous. What we find here is that the devil always goes for the foundations. In our world, we're oftentimes corralled, whether it be talking about different events going on in America, whether it be politics, whether it be, just major news stories. We're always corralled into a little box where we're only permitted to talk about certain things. You're told that's offensive to some people to say that, or it's intolerant, it's bigoted to have that stand, or we don't really know if that's true or not. The data doesn't come to us in this form of nice legalese, expert certified papers, so we can't talk about that. We can't talk about the origins of a virus. We can't talk about the integrity of elections, because those are outside the corral. If you want to talk about morality, you can't use the Bible as your basis for things, because that's outside the corral. We're always given these magic rules, and they're meant to keep us away from the foundations of what are really going on with us in the world. The devil's very good at keeping us from talking about what really matters. When it comes to issues like abortion, we're not allowed to talk about what is a life. We're instead corralled to talk about other things, use language like fetuses, talk about it as healthcare, ignore everything that is good, true, and beautiful, and only talk about the desires of adults. But what we find with Satan, the accuser himself, when it comes to his tactics, he always goes for the foundation. In the beginning, in Genesis 1, God creates the heavens and the earth, and he declares them to be good. God has seen how dark and ugly the void is, and it's not good. It's ugly. It's hideous. It's death. It's the bottomless pit, which means it doesn't have any width. It doesn't have any breadth or height or depth. It's just always sucking down. It's not a static thing. It's very hungry, and it's never satisfied. Well, God creates, and he says, you know what? This garden, it is beautiful. This earth, it is beautiful. To have land to step on, that is beautiful. For there to be an expanse, a firmament above you, these are things that are good. There's a moral element to this which can't fully be specified because there's so much mystery involved in it, but yet it is there. You can reach out and you can touch it. You can rely on it. You can try all you want, but you can't just spite it and break it. There is natural law. There are things happening here which undergird all creation, and my, oh my, it's beautiful. That's God's declaration when he makes heaven and earth. But then, you see the accuser come along. And again, we're looking at the book of Job today. The accuser comes along and basically says, there is no good. There is no beautiful. Let's just read from Job chapter 1 and find this. It says, "There was a man who lived in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and he was a man that was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil." Means he throws evil aside. He's showing it. He's setting it aside. He's not turning aside to evil. And you can go and read Psalm 40 for that. Psalm 40 verse 4, it's a great place to be. Blessed are those who make the Lord their trust. They don't turn aside to lies. They don't just get corralled into the talking points of the day and age, but they make the Lord their trust. Verse 3, it says, "His substance was also of 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, and 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-donkeys, and he had a very great household. And so this man was the greatest of all the men in the East." What we find here is that Job, he is blessed. He has a lot. He has a lot. He is someone who really lives in the upper echelons of human prosperity. He's got a lot of really good things going on for him. Verse 4 says, "And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. And it was so that when the days of their feastings were gone out, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, It may be that my sons have sinned, and cursed God in their hearts. And thus Job did continually." What we find here, breaking from the scripture, really is just a remarkable man. He's a man of gratitude, even before calamity happens. Because again, a lot of times in calamity, in moments where life is low, we oftentimes are humbled to acknowledge the truth of God. But even while Job is in abundance, before he is debased or abased, before he is lowered down in any way, whether by sin or just tragedy, he is still righteous before God. And it's a marvelous, marvelous thing. Even going and giving sacrifices on account of his children. It's an amazing thing. In verse 6, and it says, "And there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them." Again, before Moses, so when you see things like Genesis 6, the language of sons of God is language used to reference angels. This is a biblical language that we see being used. And you can just notice this when you read Scripture. You don't have to have a fancy degree to deduce that fact. You can just observe this in Scripture. One of the older descriptions we have of angels is to refer to them as the sons of God. And here they're going to and fro back on the earth, going hither and thither. And Satan is among them. We must remember that Satan is a fallen creature. That's very important to biblical orthodoxy. It's very important to understanding the world around us, that evil, that the enemies we have, that they are fallen creatures. The one exception that we really have from that biblically is the beast and the image of the beast. The beast which comes out of the bottomless pit, and I do connect that back with the void, but then also the image of the beast, which we find in Revelation 13, which has life breathed into it even though it is unborn. It's the one thing which has life even though it's outside the natural law. But as far as the serpent himself goes, the adversary, he is a fallen angel. And you see that here in the book of Job. So, verse 7, it says, "And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro on the earth, and walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth? He is a perfect and upright man, one that fears God and escheweth evil. And then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught?" Again, oh my, what a powerful thing. This is, of course, mostly King James English that I'm reading here. I'm doing a little bit of paraphrasing. But what we find, words in English that are now gone naught. N-O-U-G-H-T, sometimes spelled N-A-U-G-H-T. It's the opposite of the word ought, which refers to kind of all things or everything. But naught really means nothing. It is the void. It's the emptiness. It's not just nothing. It's a little more weighty than that. It's a very, very heavy word that we don't have here. In other words, does Job fear God for no purpose at all? Is this just something which happens out of the void, just a random happenstance that Job fears God? Satan is the accuser, and he's making a very wicked case right here. He says, "Hast not thou made a hedge about him and about his house, and all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and the substance in his land is increased. If you put forth your hand now and touch all that he hath, he will curse thee to thy face. Again, what we find here, the adversary Satan is not making an argument. He's making an unargument. With Genesis 1 comes reason and logic and order. There is a way to things. Men and women come together. They have children. God says that it is good. There is purpose to it. Men and women, they have purpose of having dominion here on the earth. The sky, it has purpose above us. The land has purpose as we walk about it. The bird has purpose in the air. It has reason. And even though it may not be a reasoning animal, it still has reason in its existence. And then when you get mankind, we do have reasoning in our mind. We have a free will. We're created in the image of God, the imago Dei. There's a lot of things happening in creation. And God creates with reason and order. There's a logic to it. It is with God's logic that things come together. But what we find here with the devil, even by his own words, he says, for naught. He is invoking the idea of unreason. You often wonder why you can't explain the motives of evil. It's because they're without motive in the proper sense. They're without proper reason. They have some broken or false reason. They have an unreason. They just want to destroy. In fact, our modern society is largely plagued by unreason and nonsense and unidentities. You find a lot of people who say inconsistent things, rebelling against tradition, rebelling against, whatever is good and true, mostly because they're just here to tear down whatever is good and true. So sometimes our society knows what it means to be a woman. Other times our society doesn't know what it means to be a woman. And it's not actually based on any sort of sound reasoning or logic. It's just whatever we need to do to tear away the foundations, whatever we need to do to deny the traditions that came before us, specifically the Christian traditions, which come before us and go all the way back to the beginning of time, because Christ is the Word, and through him through him all things were made, and without him no things were made. What we find is a rebellion and rejection against that. You see it here even in Job. Verse 13. Actually, let's go back to verse 12. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself do not put forth thy hand. And so Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. Verse 13. And there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job, saying, The oxen, they were plowing, and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of their sword, and only I have escaped to tell thee. And while yet he was speaking, there came also another servant, and he said, The fire of God has fallen upon us from heaven, and it has burned up the sheep, the servants, and consumed them. I alone escaped to tell thee. And while they were yet speaking, there came another also and said, The Chaldeans have made out into 3 bands, and they fell upon the camels and carried them away. Yea, they even slew the servants with the edge of their sword, and I alone and escaped to tell thee. And while he was yet speaking, there came a fourth also, and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and it smote the 4 corners of that house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are all dead. Only I am escaped to tell thee. And then Job arose, rent his metal, meaning he tore the clothes off of him. We don't use the word rent like that so much in modern English, though we should. He rent his mantle, shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. Job's reaction to all of this, he has just lost all of his livestock, which there are a lot. He's lost all of his servants except for 4. We only have a record here that there are 4 who have survived. He has lost all of his children, his sons, and his daughters. This terrible calamity is coming upon him. And in verse 21, he says, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The good Lord giveth, and the good Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all of this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. And that last verse is very important too, that he charges God not foolishly. He doesn't give God foolish accusations. That's actually the design of the devil. The devil is giving foolish accusations to God, but Job is not doing that. You might wonder, how in the world is the story of Job going to tie into American heritage? And it is. The reason why we're here in Job is Job gets the first things right. Cue Vince Lombardi, what is a football? We got to get back to the basics. Job understands the very basics of life. What he says in Job 1:18, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I shall return thither. The good Lord giveth, the good Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. What he is making here is a statement about the nature of life, the nature of all creation, and the nature of the good. In a way, his words really are a creed. They're the hail of a wise man who has caught wind of the truth of life. Now understand this, as we just read Job 1, Job is a man under judgment, though not of God, who is good and just, but under Satan. Satan, whose entire scheme is the ruin of all justice. A scourge has befallen Job's entire life. A scourge has come to destroy his livestock. It has slain his servants in the most, malevolent and warlike way. And now even his children are dead, killed by calamity. Still, in no way does Job sin, nor does he accuse, as is the design of Satan. But rather, Job has found himself declaring a very, very profound truth. A very profound truth. He is neither entitled to anything, nor is he deserving of anything. Naked he came into being, and naked he shall leave. Job is a man of righteousness, and he understands a fact that we oftentimes don't understand in the modern world. There is no magic rule that anything should ever exist. There's not. There's no magic rule that you should exist. Where does it say that you should be there listening to this? Where does it say that even when you're suffering that you should be entitled to something else? Where does it say that? It doesn't say that anywhere. There's no magic rule that anything should ever exist, much less that one should ever know joy at all. Yet, by a blessing of providence, there is joy. We do exist. There has been goodness. There has been prosperity. And every fleeting second of it is worthy of praise. The good Lord gives, and now he has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Every precious second that we have with the treasures of life, every precious second is a gift of God. As much pain as we expect Job to have suffered here in this moment, the man has discovered something that we would typically consider nonsense: gratitude. To those who feel entitled to whatever they want or wish to be true, gratitude feels like foolishness. And in our modern world, people do treat gratitude like foolishness. We're surrounded by a lot of people who only want to believe what they want to be true. It really is tragic. Our institutions, whether it be hierarchies within the church, whether it be academies, even medical institutions, of course, government institutions, large corporations here in society, we live in what's a very Nietzschean, Marxist way of thinking, that is the will to power. Now, it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. It goes back to Job, who just wants things to be as to Satan, like we see here in the book of Job, who wants things to be as he wants them to be. We have a lot of people who believe the world should be a certain way, whether it be through their socialist policies, through their social justice policies. They want there to be a certain way that the world works, and they refuse to acknowledge anything beyond that. They refuse to acknowledge that we as creatures are basically sinful. Which, by the way, that doesn't just mean that we do willful sins. It also means that we're erroneous, so that even sometimes our good intentions create hells in the world around us. But our modern world fails to acknowledge that. In the church, we have failed to properly talk about our American heritage. We failed to talk about the hope and the virtues of Christ because that might be offensive. And we have somehow bought into this idea that we can disciple people without confronting the politics of the world around us. That on one hand, we'll say, oh, well, we don't like the tone of that over there because, again, we want everything to be a certain way. We filter everything through tone. We have forgotten what sanctification is. We've turned it into a theory where we've got all these lengthy definitions, and we've forgotten how to show people a saint. You want to know what sanctification is? Go look at the life of the saints. Go look somewhere like Revelation 15. Men and women who we don't know how they spoke. We don't know how much knowledge they had to articulate, but we do know they stood next to Jesus when the world tried to deceive them. You want to know what sanctification means? Go look at Psalm 40. I referenced that earlier. Blessed is the man who doesn't turn aside to lies, but instead makes the Lord God his trust. You want to see sanctification? Look at Jochebed, Moses' mother, placing him down in a basket. She is doing the same thing with the sacrifice of Isaac. This child which has been given to me, if I keep it under my power, it is probably going to die. But I'm going to turn it over to God. By the logic of the world, me sacrificing the child would kill it. By the logic of the world, me placing my child in the basket is going to kill it. But I'm putting it in the basket. I'm going to do the sacrifice because I'm trusting God's way more than my way. And they do that, and they change the course of human history. That's what real sanctification looks like. Real sanctification is Nehemiah looking up and saying, you know what? All the men in my generation have failed. The experts, the sons of David, the priests, the Levites, the nobles, they've all been happy to live in ruins. They've just decided that this is the way of things. We're in the culture where we live in exile now, and woe is us. We write our poetry and we have a good time with it. But we're actually not meant to live in ruins and shambles. Hosea goes and says, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. The reason why Hosea says that is your people perish when they don't understand or appreciate their heritage. That's a statement about people being cut off from their heritage. Psalm 94, the psalmist writes, how long, O Lord, shall they afflict thine heritage? Heritage is an interesting thing. We're going to talk more about that as our sermon goes on. But when you see real saints throughout Scripture, there are people who wake up in the morning, like Job does here, and says, you know what? I'm actually not entitled to anything. However, God did make things. God made an order. And now we actually have a right order, which means there are rights. We in the modern world, we don't understand what rights are. We think about them as being entitlements of things we're owed. That's not the case. They are statements about the right order and how we fit in that right order. There are things which we can claim because we say we are built in this order. We're not a dog. We're not a bird. We're actually made in the image of God. We have a certain amount of dominion and power given over to us, but we're not the high king or queen of heaven. We sit there in a certain position. And appreciating our heritage, waking up in the morning and realizing that we didn't create any of this, but yet we are now alive. We're now tasked to walk in this earth. The good Lord gives, the good Lord takes away. That is a mark of sanity. Job, he understands that every moment of goodness is a beautiful gift. You see, in our erroneous thinking, we're all ungrateful in the modern day and age. In our ingratitude, we're all ingrates. We start off thinking, I only want to believe what I wish to be true. When it comes to how the church relates to the world around us, we don't want to admit that truth is actually out there. It actually matters what is true in the realm of the world around us. It matters what is true. The good, the true, the beautiful actually matters. And in our ingratitude, we really only want to believe the things we wish to be true. Which is very sad because that puts us in a place where we're easily depressed, where we don't understand responsibility. We don't rise to the occasion to defend our children. We despise our own birthright like Esau does, selling it to Jacob for a bowl of porridge. We find ourselves afflicting our heritage, which ultimately afflicts God's heritage. But the contrast to that comes through Job. Job, who says, the good Lord giveth, the good Lord taketh away. So I want to examine heritage. A heritage is a remarkable gift. Your heritage is totally unchosen, yet it is granted at birth. It's fully granted to you at birth. You do nothing to deserve it, and you can lose it in a heartbeat. You can reject it altogether if you want to, but yet you cannot exist without it. The heritage we have is not a cheap thing, even among sinners. It is purchased at the cost of entire generations, hundreds of years of blood and sweat. Now, heritage in our fallen world is a very dynamic thing because it's always riddled with sin and plagued by the curse. When I say plagued by the curse, I mean it's plagued by death. It's plagued by a lot of dark things. And the adversary, who never fails to set snares for the young, he always exaggerates the ugliness of the past and ignores its blessings. That's one of the chief tactics of the adversary. The devil is an ingrate. In fact, he's the chief ingrate among all fallen creatures. And at every turn, the devil is seeking the desolation of truth. And the challenge that everyone has, that is a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve, is to honor the God-given elements of our heritage and then redeem and overcome the sinful aspects. There are going to be sinful aspects of our heritage that have to be cast aside. But we can't escape who we are. It's not so easy to just dismiss who we are. Heritage is a part of who you are. Whence you were born, you don't have a choice in that. Nor did you have any choices in the circumstances therein. You must learn to square away your heritage. And of course, this ties into the fifth commandment, to honor thy father and mother, that your days be long in the land that the Lord God giveth unto thee. If you're going to have meaningful days, you have to square away your heritage. And yes, that does mean, surface level things like having gestures of gratitude for your parents, but it also means deeper things that tie into your bloodline. Sometimes your parents are utterly sinful, and there's no shortage of that in our world. I know a lot of people whose parents do wicked things, and do wicked things to them even as they're adults. And that leaves some pretty heavy scars on people. They're scars that are beyond mortal repair. And for those people, the best thing they can do is be honorable and bring honor to their bloodline even as their parents have been sinful. That's hard to do because your parents didn't example for you how your traits, your personality, how someone of your looks and your attitudes, how they sort that out in a righteous way. But yet you are expected to do that. And it's not easy. You're going to have the Lord come in and take you up and show you the way. And that's where you get something like Psalm 27. When my mother and father forsake me, the Lord will take me up. That whole psalm ends by saying, show me the way of righteousness, O Lord. The Lord will show you the land of goodness. He will take you there to the land of the living, and you will see his goodness. But you have to trust on him. It's not easy, but you can't dismiss it. That's the challenge that you have in life. Going now to Matthew chapter 7, we're going to talk about what it means to judge and how that relates to heritage and everything around us. In Matthew 7, 1 and 2, it says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." You can even go somewhere like in Matthew 12, where they look at Jesus and they say, this one is in league with the devil and his demons. He is Beelzebub. He is, corrupt. And Jesus looks at him and says, okay, you like for Beelzebub to be the metric? Well, okay then. Beelzebub will be your metric. You have chosen to be judged by devils, and now you will be judged by devils. And of course, I quote all the time, Matthew 12:37, by your words you be justified, by your words you be condemned. We do know that the metric we use will be used against us. Now, in the modern church, in that day and age in which we live, we read this as a depressant. This is something which we use to suppress our aspirations and our character. We take these verses to prevent ourselves from acting, fearing that the wrong action might place one into judgment. But in contrast to that attitude, I want us to take a different angle to this, one that is actually a courageous leap of faith, one that is demonstrated in Psalm 26. In Psalm 26, we read something which I dare say you would find a lot of people in the modern church right. What you find in Psalm 26 is the following: "Judge me, O Lord." Let me read that again. "Judge me, O Lord. For I have walked in mine integrity. I have trusted also in the Lord. Therefore I shall not slide. Examine me, Lord, and prove me. Try my reins and my heart." The psalmist in Psalm 26 openly says, you know what? I'm not going to shrink away, worried that I might walk in error. Instead, I actually am going to go out and do a lot of things. And every step of the way, I'm going to invite the Lord to judge me. Rather than cowering and shriveling up in a cocoon, I'm actually going to step out the door and invite the Lord in every moment. Rather than cowering in the name of judgment, I'm actually going to invite it. And that's a whole nother system of thought. It's one that's actually essential to the American heritage. We're going to get there with the Declaration of Independence. But it's one that's entirely foreign to us today. We're corralled into a corner where we're always depressing virtue. We're depressing faith when we should be testing it, trying it in the world around us. We even are a little bit nervous of that. We are at a place now where we can't even talk about, testing the virtues of God, because we confuse that with testing God and things of that nature, and we get ourselves all up in a knot, when the fact of the matter is, God actually says, no, I've given you virtues, go out in the world and try them, see how they work. Jesus says, go out and see if there's a colt tied, next to this house. The angels say, go out and see if there's a baby in a manger. Abraham, Sarah, get up, go where I lead you. Time and time again, God actually tells us, go out and test what I give you against the world. That's different from testing God, but it is testing his virtues to find out just how true they are, because guess what? In the end, they aren't reliable. And what we find here in Psalm 26 is an invitation for the Lord to actually walk with us and judge us on that intimate, direct level. This is real courage. And also something that people say when they really do have faith. So let's talk about American heritage for a moment. Let's go to the Declaration of Independence. A lot of people are going to be reading, well, in a sane world, we would have a lot of people reading the Declaration of Independence, at least its opening lines. We probably won't have that, if I'm being honest. So it's largely something we don't do, is honor our past. But I want to go now to the end of the Declaration of Independence. The closing of the Declaration of Independence is framed with these words. It says, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. Now, that little excerpt is the writers of the Declaration of Independence inviting God to judge them. They understood that anything good on this earth is a gift from nature and nature's God. In fact, it's very similar to what Job says. The idea that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that these come from providence, that rights come from providence, that's an understanding that you get with Job saying, naked I came into this earth, naked I shall go away. I'm not actually magically given anything. The only reason I have anything is because God has given it to me. That's the common factor you find in Job's statement and the Declaration of Independence. We're not magically given anything. By just the laws of nothingness, of the void, you don't have anything at all. The only reason you have anything good is because the good Lord gives it, and the good Lord can take it away. Without providence giving anything, there is nothing at all. And the writers of our declaration, in the same sentiment that you find with something like the Mayflower Compact, and the Mayflower Compact from 1620, they come and they openly say that this nation, it is for the glory of God, for the advancement of the Christian faith. It is a Christian nation. In the name of God, for the glory of God, and the advancement of the Christian faith. They did not create some cowardly idea in their head which might ignore or dismiss God's judgment, but rather they confronted it head on. They were to build something beautiful, and if they were in error, may God take it away. Now, our nation has lost its way. Our institutions openly advance sin, they openly mock God, and defile everything true with arrogant words. Those who seek unity over truth will get neither, and they are worthy of neither. Unity is a reward to be earned. It is an effect and not a cause. Anyone who pursues unity as its own principle will always become a friend to evil, as the devil is never slack, and he knows that those who insist upon unity, they are ready to accommodate the lies. So the devil is never slack. And the only way that our nation can get back is through revival. And the only way to revival is by declaring what is good, true, and beautiful. America was a Christian nation. And as preposterously popular as it is to despise and afflict our own heritage, the only path to the good is through Christ. Our nation cannot hold together with anything less than Christian principles. Recently, the Supreme Court came out and ruled that it was unlawful for a high school coach. The Supreme Court took up a case. A school district said it was unlawful for a high school coach to pray at a football game. And the Supreme Court ruled in and said, you know what? That's actually a violation of his First Amendment right. And if he wants to pray at the football game, he can. And I've seen a lot of people, even people kind of on my side of things, people that are in one way or another part of the church. They try to be the people who are walking in the course of truth. They've been talking about, well, you know, if you actually are okay with the Christian praying, then you have to be okay with the Muslim praying or with the Hindu praying. And if not, you're not in favor of religious freedom, but you're in favor of religious oppression. And that sounds all good and correct, but that's actually a formula and not a principle. America was not founded as a Muslim or a Hindu nation. America was founded as a Christian nation. And the idea of something like freedom of speech can actually only be had with biblical values at the core. Again, our modern day and age is filled with ingrates, and we've been willfully made dumb about our own heritage. You don't find around the world this universal principle of people having the freedom of speech, where, you know, everybody coexists together. Two people with different belief systems can both be wrong, but they cannot both be right. And the idea that every voice matters, that comes from the New Testament. Comes from things like Matthew 9:9, where Jesus sees a man called Matthew. The world sees tax collectors and sinners. To put that in the modern day and age, our modern world sees people and looks at them and says, you're white, you're black, you're a man, you're a woman, this is your sexual preference. The world always sees people on those superficial values, where God looks at people and says, you know what? That's a man called Matthew. There's a woman named Lydia down by the well, and she makes purple, and she needs to hear the gospel. There's a jailer who's been put in a precarious situation, and he actually needs salvation. And by the way, so does his wife at home and his children. And there's even a few servants around there that need to be blessed as well. You see, those slaves over there in that nation, they need salvation from their sin more than they need a social program. Because you can free people from their slavery and they still live lives of misery and chaos. Because believe it or not, having rights given to you by the world doesn't actually make your life more enjoyable. But what they need first is to be cleansed of their sins so that they can walk with me, who shows them the real joys of life. And oh yeah, the social programs, they need to come, but they happen in their order of things. First comes the declaration of who is God, who is worthy of fear, who establishes what is good, and who takes away what is good. You see, we've been corralled in the modern day and age into a fake mode of thinking that will ruin us. There's a lot of people who would say, oh, well, you know, you can't actually have Christianity in the public sphere because that would be offensive to someone. You will lose America doing that, and you will deserve it. It will be justice on God's behalf. There's a lot of people who have forgotten that we are first and foremost to be Christians. America is not. It's not even Jerusalem or Israel or some sort of land that has been, established by God's providence in the direct and unique way that God chose the people of Israel and God chose the land that is there around Jerusalem. America can have providential inspirations, and it can come together as a result of providence, but that doesn't mean that it is the same level as God's chosen land there in the past. But if there's to be any goodness or any beauty or any hope that is found in a Christian nation, it comes from recognizing Christ. And we, in our ingratitude in the modern day and age, think we can have the fruits, things like freedom of speech, without asserting the Christian principles. You can't. The Christian principles come first. They understood this in the Declaration of Independence. They understood this in the Mayflower Compact. It's found in the Constitution, in its preamble, and how they write things. And we have just utterly forgotten that. We've taken the suicide of thought and we've forgotten that. We've been corralled into a sandbox of controlled discourse wherein we are told to set aside biblical values to avoid unfairness and oppression, but the effect and the result is the exact opposite. For without acknowledging God and his hand of providence, specifically the Christian faith, there is only the tyranny of the will, only the cold desire for power. And the challenge that I have for us today is to fuse together Job 118 and Psalm 26. And we in the church, we need to read things like Psalm 26 because this is going to sound really different than how we are often taught. Psalm 26 reads, "Judge me, O Lord, for I have walked in mine integrity. I have trusted also in the Lord, therefore I shall not slide. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my reins and my heart. For thy loving kindness is before mine eyes, and I have walked in thy truth. I have not sat with vain persons, neither shall I go in with the dissemblers," the people who deconstruct and tear everything down. I don't sit down with the people who afflict our heritage. Verse 5, "I have hated the congregation of evildoers, and will not sit with the wicked. I will wash mine hands in innocency, and I will compass thine heart, O Lord," or thine altar, O Lord. In other words, I will surround thine altar, "that I may publish with the voice of thanksgiving and tell of all thy wondrous works. Lord, I have loved the habitation of thy house and the place where thine honor dwelleth. Gather not my soul with sinners, nor my life with bloody men, in whose hands is mischief, and their right hand is full of bribes. But as for me, I walk in mine integrity. Redeem me, and be merciful unto me. My foot standeth in an even place, and in the congregations will I bless the Lord." Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful stuff. We have to fuse these things together. Every God-fearing Christian who serves the Lord can be assured of his goodness. With that comes the hope of joy. We tend to focus on what we want and need in the world around us. But God actually operates not on those terms. He actually looks at what is good and beautiful, what brings joy. I love Daniel Defoe's novel, The Life and Adventure of Robinson Crusoe. And there's a moment kind of in the middle of that book where Robinson Crusoe, he's been, stuck on this desert isle for a while. He's been a slave. He rejected the wisdom of his father. He rejected his own heritage, and now he's paying the price for that. And he even becomes, aware that I didn't take my father's advice not to become a seafaring man, and now I'm out here stranded. But there's a moment where he's trying to decide whether or not to curse God and die, like Job is challenged by his wife. And he sits down and realizes that even though I've been stranded for years, been out here for years on this island, almost 30 years he spends there. He says, I've learned to focus not on what I wanted, but rather what gave me joy. That's a whole nother way of thinking. We tend to think wants and needs. These are kind of the two poles. But a real Christian does not even think between those two poles, but instead they see the heaven to admire and the hell to repulse. The terms are not want versus need, but they're actually the good and the empty. The joy, and with joy comes great, great sorrow. It's Ecclesiastes 1:18 tells us, he that increases joy increases sorrow. Anything worthy of sorrow is worthy of joy. The adversary wants us to think in terms of wants and needs. I also love how in John Milton, when John Milton talks about the sin of Adam, in part the sin of the devil, they serve passivity. And passivity is a service to necessity of all things. Of what you think that you need to do right now. Of what you think is the most important action for you to take right now. Service to necessity is itself a service to passivity. That's an interesting thing. We oftentimes think of passivity as being an inactive thing, but John Milton actually describes it as being a very active thing. Esau would fit into that category of being passive when he despises his own birthright. He is serving necessity rather than what ultimately matters. He's not thinking in terms of what brings joy, what is good and true and beautiful. He's thinking about, my wants and needs. How can I be more comfortable now? We have to be like Job. Now, that is no easy thing. Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe, that takes 28 years on a desert isle to sort out. And also, 2 years of slavery before then, and all the other calamities that happen in life, disasters at sea, things of that nature. It takes a lot of bad things oftentimes to get us to that point. Job is remarkable in that he's pretty righteous before the calamity. He's righteous afterwards. He does get trapped up in the nonsense of his friends, and God does have to show up in a tornado and say, "Gird up your loins like a man and give me an answer, for I demanded of thee." That does happen in Job 38, but overall, Job is a very righteous man, and God actually wants to bless him. God wants to bless us. We have to be bold enough to not hide and cower, but to step out and say, "Lord, do judge me. Do judge me." Because only people with a sincere heart are going to make that statement. All right, we're going to end our sermon right there. Got a lot of other things that we could talk about, but I think we'll just wrap it up there. So with that, God love you, and have a blessed day.